something I thought about before the interview is you're asking me about being productive, and I think one of the things I thought of that's most important is imagination.
What is up, Dev Crew? Today we're here with Martha Sharpe. She is a talented developer who has been teaching herself how to code for about the past year or so. And she's also a LinkedIn top voice in 2019 for software development, which is really exciting. She also has some great tips for us today on how to stay motivated and productive as a self-taught developer, especially with a non-traditional coding background. So thanks for being with us today, Martha. I'm really excited to have you.
Me.
So let's jump right into your background. I think it's going to be really informative and helpful for those who, didn't do a lot of, math or engineering heavy stuff. How did you start programming? Or first, tell us all the careers you've been in. I think that'll be a good place to start.
Well, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, if you look at my resume, yeah, it's very non-technical. Like I went to college, but I got a bachelor's degree in classical studies. So it's Greek and Latin and history and stuff. And prior to that in high school, I was a karate instructor. So I was very driven for that too, very motivated to progress at an alarming rate. And after college, I spent some time in ministry, and I ended up going to bartending school and being a bartender. and
That's funny because those seem a little bit opposed to each other.
Everyone points that out. It's like, okay, so I'm going to study some Greek and to become a minister, and then I'm going to learn how to be a bartender, and then web development, yay!
Right.
Well, okay, but there's more there. So after the past 10 years, I've been a stay-at-home mom. Started a family. Right. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I have 4 kids under the age of 7. So that's pretty busy too.
It's probably been your hardest job so far, right?
It's been extremely demanding. Kind of segues into how I got into web development, actually, because it was a moment a few years ago that actually my husband he was looking for a career change, and he was actually studying for a test that he was going to take. I looked over his shoulder, and it was just a simple algebra problem. And I got so excited, and I just pushed him aside and said, let me do it. And I mean, that moment was so surprising to me, because for one thing, I had never been excited about math before. Like, as a student, I was AAA and then B for math, basically. And I actually did take a few semesters of calculus in college because I thought I wanted to be an astrophysics major. But then I didn't want to torture myself anymore, so I switched. But that was still valuable. I mean, it seems wasted because I didn't get a degree in it, but just going through all those problems, it formed my logical reasoning and analyzing complex problems kind of thing, which I'm using again now. So that's nice. But that moment when I wanted to solve for X, I realized that I was bored. I was actually bored. And as you said, being a stay-at-home mom of 4 young kids should not be boring. But I call it being brain bored. My brain was bored. Like, I was working hard all day long to meet all these different demands. It was like my shift was 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and on call overnight kind of thing. But yeah, intellectually, I hadn't been challenged for a long time. So that's when I started thinking about web development. And specifically, and also because both my mom and my older sister are software engineers. So they kind of went through the same thing where they got brain bored and they made a switch. And so I thought maybe it runs in the family, and maybe I was, you know,
That's awesome.
like the career for the women in my family kind of thing. And so I picked up a book from the library, which was Java for Dummies. And I loved it. I was hooked. My first program I wrote in Java was just a guessing game, guess the number between 1 and 100, and I was so excited. But I switched to web development because just what people have said, that it's easier that you can do more with it faster, whereas Java, I'd have to have years to get good at it. Basically, that's what people told me anyway. But we waited until, or my husband, Nat Sharpe, but you interviewed him.
Yeah.
We waited till he went first. So he went to a boot camp, and then after he landed his first job as a software engineer, then it was my turn. So I've been teaching myself through Free Code Camp. Well, I mean, that was one resource. There's lots of resources. But trying to do it in a low risk kind of way, kind of like getting the book from the library thing, like very low risk, no money involved even. And so I can reserve, basically, so if along the line I realize it's a big mistake or it's not for me after all, it's no big deal. And it's definitely helped having Nat around to encourage me and ask questions too. So anyway, did that answer the question?
I think you touched on something that's really important. That I remember reading an article a while ago that said you need to basically do like 100 hours in programming before you jump into like any boot camp or anything like that. And I think you don't necessarily have to do a boot camp, and we're going to get into how you stayed motivated about one, because I'm definitely not one of those. I went and got my degree because I was like, I need something to push me. But I think it's really important, if anyone's listening and saying, hey, I want to become a developer, I think it's really important you go and try it before, try it for several dozens or hundreds of hours, or at least 100 hours, and try it out. Because I think it's a really great way to not put all your money down and then go, oh, I really don't like this. So I thought that was interesting. You touched on that. So I didn't realize that you and Nat both kind of got interested near the same time. So that was really cool to learn.
I talked him into it.
You talked him into it? That's so cool.
Yeah, he would be so good at this. He had a background in film editing, and he's just so smart and lives so fast. And anyway, but I talked him into it. So
that's so cool. So let's talk a little bit about you're looking for your first role right now as a software developer, engineer, whatever, however you want to phrase it, right? These titles are really funny. But and I know you posted recently that you're playing with your resume and tweaking it after you got some feedback. I want to learn, you mentioned something earlier as we were talking before we started recording about how your experience, bringing your experience together, a holistic approach to your background can really help you if you come from like a self-taught, or you're not getting a degree or something like that. Can you touch on that?
Right. I mean, you look at your resume, or you think of the things that you've gone through prior to web development, and it's so easy to see them as unrelated, or like just a waste of time. I should have gotten into web development right away, or but they might look disconnected on a piece of paper, but if you draw, it's so healthy to go back and make that connection of how it's all contributed to, who you are today, but also who you are as, what your strengths and skills are as a programmer. Skills. We just watched Napoleon Dynamite last night. So.
Mad skills.
For example, like I wrote my most recent article, my second article was about, I drew from my karate background, and I draw from that. I draw from that background and make comparisons. And like for example, the imposter syndrome, right? It's totally real, not just in web development, but in any area. And basically when I was in karate, I trained and trained and trained like crazy. And there was a black belt pre-test, which didn't think I was going to be testing for black belt because I hadn't had enough time in training. Like it's supposed to be a minimum of like 3 years before you can even test. So I was joining in the pre-test as just a good workout, some more good workout and practice. But after the pre-test, all the black belts, senior black belt panel gets together and discusses. It's kind of like an interview, like an interview for software engineering. There's that another connection. And
like a mob interview, it sounds like.
Exactly, exactly a mob interview. And they decided that I was ready to test for black belt for real. And it was unbelievable to me. Like, what? I've been training for half the required time. What is going on here? And a lot of the other students were very upset. They started training before I did, and now we were going to be the same rank. What? But was I going to argue with the panel of black belts? I mean, so there's some imposter syndrome there. Like, there I was lined up with all these people who had been training longer than me. But that's an example of, if you put in the work, time doesn't matter as much as what you do with it. Like if you really apply yourself and you work those algorithms and you build projects, and it's like nonstop obsession, honing your craft and just learn, you can progress at an amazing rate. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why, like, Nat decided to go to a boot camp instead of go for a degree, because 4 years, and he would have had to take all these humanities classes and other classes that had nothing to do with computer programming, and we couldn't afford that kind of time, let alone the money, so yeah. So it's kind of nice that there's boot camps around for so many people who want to switch careers or get into it, but aren't gonna go to college for 4 years to so anyway, so I tied my karate background into that for that article. And there's other things, like my first project I made with JavaScript. My first original project was a bartending game, because I had been a bartender, and I thought, whoa, this would be really fun. And it solved a practical real life problem, because I had to learn to mix over 250 drinks at bartending school. And having a game like that I could just play and learn how to mix all those drinks would have been really awesome. And I even thought this could be like a barista game for Sharpe employees, or, learning how to mix the ingredients. So I could definitely expand on that if I wanted to. But anyway, just drawing from your background and just kind of realizing that it's all the same person doing all these things. And it's not, what you do isn't necessarily your identity either. Like, it's not, what are you going to be when you grow up? And it's like one answer to that question is like, now I'm going to be a web developer for, I don't know how long. It's just, I mean, am I going to get into being an entrepreneur later, or am I going to be, I mean, who knows?
That's so funny you mentioned that, because I heard recently, because I forgot what the reference is, but they were talking about how you shouldn't refer to yourself as your job or as to what you do. So like, because if you ever let's say you get in an accident, you become quadriplegic, and you were a Olympic athlete. If you say I'm an Olympic athlete, you're going to become depressed, possibly suicidal. And so they suggested, say, I develop programs. I love to pursue a gold medal or something like that, versus I am this thing. I think that's a really important distinction. And how we, I hope to get in this too, is self-talk about, because you kind of mentioned with this imposter syndrome and stuff, we talk about our self-talk and how that can affect our motivation and things like that. I don't know if you've had any experience with that as well.
Self-talk meaning like the things we tell ourselves and our inner voice?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, so, uh, so definitely, I'm gonna have people go check out your Kick Imposter Syndrome article. That I was briefly going over that before our interview, and I thought that was great. So go check that out. We'll probably put a link down below to the article as well. Um, so what before we get off of the LinkedIn topic and get into more of the productivity stuff, I think it'd be really interesting because you're one of, I think only 10, was there 10 different individuals chosen for the
Yeah.
LinkedIn Top Voice in software development?
Yeah.
So you're one of only 10. And I think weren't you one of like the top one or something like that? Or
Yeah, I was
yeah,
number
you're like number three. You were way up there. I was like, this is awesome. Like, wow. So number one, that must have felt, were you expecting it? And number two, how did you get there?
Well, I mean, it was a surprise. I mean, it was something like October or November. It was after I had written my first article, which is about my uh, journey into web development kind of thing. And I just got contacted by someone from LinkedIn saying that I was a candidate for it and asked me to fill out like a questionnaire about my LinkedIn activity. And then towards the end of the year, he notified me that I was one of them, and I was like, great. And then I actually looked at the list, and I couldn't believe anyway, that was number three. And actually, the response I've gotten on LinkedIn has always been kind of a mystery to me, because I'm very inspired by other people who post on LinkedIn, and I think I don't see myself as doing anything that's that much different. Like I try to do things a little bit different, but not that much different, you know? Um, so, but some of the things people have shared with me is just that, I mean, shared with me how inspiring I am. And here I am just trying to learn publicly so I can eventually get a job kind of thing. But I'm so glad that my journey can be inspiring to others. And I think, yeah, that's probably what is so encouraging to people, I would think, is that I've been very willing to just share my journey instead of just trying to look good and show off how much I know. I've just been very open with the struggles I've gone through and just how much more I need to learn and different things like that. And so it's kind of, I don't know, that's kind of my guess why people would be encouraged, but you might have to ask someone else about that.
Yeah, my guess too would be besides being vulnerable and genuine, which you obviously come across as, is I think when things are approachable and people go, I could be Martha, right? I could be Nat. When people can look at that, sometimes it's nice to see motivational speakers and stuff. Like someday I hope to be a motivational speaker, but I think sometimes it can be like, I can't be Tony Robbins. That guy's crazy. Like, you know what I mean? So that might be part of it too. So again, we're really it's really a pleasure to have you on here and be able to have your personality and for you to share this stuff with us. So let's jump into productivity. So you basically taught yourself. I mean, I'm sure you've collaborated with Nat, but most of your education, how's that happened over the past? I'm guessing you started in 2019 or 2018, something like that. How did
Right.
that start, and what have you done so far?
Well, it was after we moved to Atlanta and got settled in a little bit. And so when was that? I mean, I say April is when I really started. And I started out with like Code Academy, like the just the free courses on there, and I think those are really nice because the descriptions are very thorough and understandable, and you have the little console over here, and you can see what you're doing. So I was very impressed with those courses as an introduction. I went to my first meetup. It was a free code camp meetup here in town, that my husband recommended. and that experience blew me away. I walked in and there were a bunch of developers sitting around tables, and I just sat down, said, "Hey guys, I'm a beginner." And they were just so welcoming and helpful. They just started teaching me all sorts of things that I never would have even thought to ask about. I've learned so much from just sitting down next to a random person and them started teaching me something randomly. It's like things that no online courses show you. It's just like,
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was enormous. And that's where I actually first heard about Free Code Camp as an online course. So I checked that out, and I spent a lot of time looking for the perfect course, the perfect curriculum that if I just followed that, I'd know everything I need to know and I'd be set. And it took me a while to realize, you know what? There's no perfect all-encompassing course out there. And that's true for any boot camp too. Like, it'll give you a head start, but you really need, even at a boot camp, there's only so much you can cover, and you really need to take initiative and keep learning for that too. So that's what I realized, is there's no magic answer to how to learn web development. And even on the job, actually on the job is probably going to be similar to what I've been doing the past several months, because I've been having to Google all sorts of it. I mean, Google is my best friend. I love Stack Overflow. I've even asked a couple questions on Stack Overflow. Just basically learn how to be super resourceful in terms of finding the answers and learning the things you need to know. There's articles, there's online tutorials, there's all sorts of things. In fact, I finished the first 3 certifications in Free Code Camp, but I almost didn't, because I was expecting it to just teach me everything I needed to know. Once I realized that wasn't the case, I started learning from other resources as well, and just using Free Code Camp as a guide for what to learn,
Right.
But after that, basically since October, I've been teaching myself through tutorials, building projects to get better at React and Redux, and learning more front-end libraries, and just all sorts of different things. Just every tutorial I go through too, I get to watch how they code, learn best practices, assuming they use best practices. The tutorials, they actually talk about what they're doing and why you don't do it this other way, instead of just doing it. Yeah, so anyway, it's just so much to learn. So much to learn out there.
Yeah. So from what I heard from your explanation and background, you've had to keep self-motivated to hit these different targets and goals, and try to discover a learning path for yourself, which is very hard to do. It's, even as a professional developer now, it's hard to say, okay, what do I need to focus on next, right? So how did you keep going from day to day? What was the motivating factor to keep you coding every day, right? Because you weren't paying out of pocket a lot of money, right? If you weren't paying for a boot camp, which is usually like 10 grand or something like that, and you didn't have deadlines, right? With Free Code Camp, weren't they all just self-imposed? So, what was keeping you motivated from day to day and keeping you productive?
Well, there's a lot of great mental tricks that I've learned to use over the years. One thing is knowing what you want on different levels, like subdividing goals. So I have this super long-term goal, which is this vision of a happy life with my family and not being stressed out and insecure, all this stuff, like super long-term kind of vision. And then the next step to get there is like, okay, get a job in web development, then we'll double our income, all that stuff. But even that's way too long term. Like, if that's my goal, I'm gonna get way overwhelmed, so I subdivide it even more. Mm-hmm. and say, okay, well, I'm going to so like the Free Code Camp, I'm gonna get the certifications through Free Code Camp, and the one I'm on now is this one. So, and this is how long it's going to take. So I say, how long is it going to take me to finish this certification? I put it on the calendar, and then I have my plan, like, but it still has to be adaptable. So like, for example, I was planning on doing the microservices, API and microservices certification. And that's when they revamped their website, Free Code Camp did. And so it was down for a long time. And then when I went back to try to do it, what I was working on wasn't working anymore. And I'm just like, okay, well, this is a sign that I'm done with Free Code Camp and I need to just find my own way, you know? So yeah, adaptability is really important. So knowing what you want and having a plan to get there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, not just knowing what you want, that's very important, but having a plan to get there, like a step-by-step plan, but also being very adaptable, having that's agile, right? I mean, that's really big software is agile, having an agile plan, that you, for the one hand, you're open to either changing plans or adjusting based on different opportunities, or if the timing isn't quite right, things come up. But in terms of, so that's one thing, is just knowing what you want and subdividing it into smaller goals and then having a plan to get there, kind of thing. Another thing, I mean, you mentioned that I didn't pay $10,000 to go to a boot camp, right? I was so tempted to go to a boot camp. I wanted to go so bad, because just imagining all the things that I would learn and having actual teachers that I could ask questions and other students that I could work on projects with and play ping pong. It sounded awesome. But here's the mental trick. I thought to myself, you know what? If someone was paying me $10,000 to teach myself web development, would I do it? And I was like, heck yeah, I would. So basically, by not spending $10,000, I was paying myself $10,000 just to teach myself web development. So that was one mental trick. Another mental trick was, I mean, like early on or along the lines, there's moments of discouragement, you know, working through a super hard algorithm and I just can't get this, or some configuration problem, like, why is this not working? It was working yesterday, or, you know, and just getting discouraged and like, oh, maybe I'm not cut out for this, or I'm not smart enough, or, and whenever I start thinking about that, I imagine what it would be like to actually quit and just go back to how life was before and not code anymore. And so basically I asked myself, well, if I quit, what else would I do? I'm like, nope, I'm gonna keep going. Yeah, I mean, I'm discouraged and I'm stuck right now, but there's nothing else I'd rather be doing, so I may as well just keep going, you know? But if I actually had an answer to that question, like if I did quit, I'd much rather be doing this other thing than maybe I would have. I mean, especially if I saw that other thing would help me towards my long-term goals as well, as what I was trying now. So anyway, so there's just a few little mental tricks, but one thing that's so important to stay motivated is other people. Like, even if you're an introvert or awkward or whatever, we're still very social beings. We need that feedback from other people in some form. I wasn't getting it from a boot camp, so I had to find it some other way. Meetups have been amazing. Every time I go to a meetup, I come home with like this super high energy, like, yes, this is awesome, I can do this. And it helps so much to get that in-person feedback from other developers. And the other thing has been LinkedIn. Like, that's one reason I've been so active on LinkedIn, is because I haven't had that other outlet to talk to other developers and get feedback on my projects and stuff. So I've just basically been using LinkedIn as my school forum, or whatever you want to say. So yeah, so those are all the different tricks. I'm sharing all my little tricks. It's very nice.
That's awesome. Thanks for that. I'll have to go back over this again and break them down some more. While you're talking, it reminded me of I think it was a post you did on everything's hard the first time. Was that a post that you did?
Yes.
I thought about that. I was like, man, that's so right. The first time, it's so hard to get over that. I think there's something special to that mindset of going and giving yourself permission to say, this is the first time I've done this. This is going to be hard.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to elaborate on that post that you did?
Well, I think about examples from where it's the same in any most areas of life, like working out. The very first time you start working out, your muscles hurt so bad. It's so hard, and your muscles are so sore afterwards. But then every other workout after that is going to be less and less. The first one is the hardest. And I mean, it's the same with like when I was learning Greek, I literally had a headache from trying to sound out these foreign letters. I felt like I was in kindergarten sounding out the letters again, but then after that, it just got easier. But yeah, I think in my post, I mentioned a few examples of when I felt that, like using React for the first time and finding out how the components communicate with each other and pass down props and everything, or setting up Redux for the first time.
Yeah.
There's so many, I mean, just setting it up and finding out how it's all connected and where to import and export and all this stuff is just.
Yeah, you talked about APIs, I think, on that post too.
Oh,
like
right.
setting up an API or from the putting up your API on the front end, the back end, and everything.
Right. Yeah.
It's fun. I think it goes deeper too. Is just to realize, like, even though it might not be as hard that first time, but even a first time in a new environment or something like that, it can still be a little bit disorienting. Even if we've been doing this for years, right? Even if you've been, I don't know of a good analogy from another thing, but even if you like learning a brand new language, right? If you were to learn Japanese versus, I don't know, Spanish. Japanese is probably going to be a lot harder to learn because you don't have the cognates, you don't have all this other stuff that helped you maybe learn a different language.
Right. Yeah.
So, what does productivity feel like to you? How do you know you're being productive?
What does it feel like? Well, I mean, it goes back to that knowing what I want thing, and always keeping that in mind. So, like, for example, I would draw a distinction between being productive and just being busy.
Yeah.
It's easy to just keep busy doing all sorts of things and not make any progress towards what you actually want and what your goals are. I mean, that's one danger of social media or YouTube or all sorts of things that you can get drawn into that are actually a distraction from. I got obsessed with this game called Cookie Clicker when around the same time I started learning web development. And every time I got stuck on something or just tired, I started just clicking that cookie. And eventually I just realized this is keeping me from my goals. It's got to go. And I just cleared I deleted it, cleared all the progress I had made and no more, but I needed to be very clear about what I wanted in order to do that. So yeah, we can keep busy with all sorts of things. And the difference is if you know what you want and you're working towards it, then you're being productive. And I mean, that's something I thought about before the interview is you're asking me about being productive. And I think one of the things I thought of that's most important is imagination. I mean, I talk about knowing what you want, but how are you going to get there unless you can imagine it? You have to, actually, they talk about this like in basketball, you have to visualize the ball going in the hoop and it'll happen more often. It's this crazy thing. Like the imagination is so powerful.
So I think it's interesting because I actually, I listen to a lot of productivity books and stuff. And I imagine you might too. I know Nat said he reads a lot. I listen. I don't read enough, but I have an auditory learning leaning. I like to listen more. But I heard that long-term thinking is the greatest predictor of upward mobility and wealth, and possibly income as well. So the longer term that you can think, the better. And that's something that I've had a hard time thinking of is and you bring up creativity, is being able to think, okay, this is what I want. Just like you said earlier, and I think that we're seeing now that's how you've been able to be so productive, is you have this long-term vision, right? This long-term, and you think you have to create something, right? A vision. You have this long-term vision of, this is where I want to be financially and mentally and emotionally. Like in the future, I want to have this great career, and I want to have this whatever you've created in your head.
Mhm.
And have you been able to? How do you tap into that? Do you tap into that on a daily basis? Because that's been something that's been hard for me, right? Hard for me to do, because I've wanted that same thing, right? We all want more as humans. We love having more, but sometimes those motivations are good. Sometimes they could be better. But how do we tap into those long-term visions for what we want for ourselves and our families to be able to be more productive?
Yeah. I mentioned imagination, but a huge thing, I mean, for one thing, imagination can also hinder us, because it can cause a lot of fear. So if your imagination is kind of negative, you imagine all the terrible things that will happen, or you think about some long-term goal, but then you imagine how much work it's going to take and all the obstacles that could come up and how much opposition you could meet, and then you imagine it's not even going to happen anyway, so that'll all be wasted. I mean, so imagination is very powerful either, and it depends on whether it's positive or negative, whether you're going to follow it or not, and I don't know. I think because of that fear or doubt or just, and people might end up like shutting off their imagination, like just like, this is kind of a useless exercise because it's not going to happen anyway. So I'll just do what I do and go through life. I don't know. But I think that's the thing, is you can actually train yourself and use mental tricks and be around the people you're around, the things you read or listen to, or that inner voice you were talking about. What did you call that? Self-talk or whatever? What did you call
Yeah,
it?
I can't remember.
No,
Yeah, I think I say self-talk or something like that. How, like talking to yourself, how
yeah,
your inner dialogue, right? I think we
right.
talked
And you
about
can
that.
actually change that inner dialogue too. Uh, and my inner dialogue actually got pretty negative about a week ago. That was that video I did, where I was actually just sharing what a hard time I was having, basically.
Yeah.
And and I almost didn't share that video because I don't like having pity parties or like trying to get sympathy or whatever. But Nat actually encouraged me to post it because he thought it would help a lot of people who are going through the same thing, and turns out he was right. Um, so so yeah, but my imagination got very negative right then, and it was so helpful to post that so that I could get help from other people to help change my inner voice. Sometimes we need to surround ourselves with people who have a good outside voice that we can help incorporate into our inside voice. And the opposite is true too. If you're hanging out with people who have negative outside voices, I've noticed this about social media in general, and unfortunately, there's a lot of negativity out there, and I, I don't, I like I'll see some great article or something. I think it's great, so I look at the comments, and most of them are negative. It's like, come on, people, can't you see how awesome this is? I don't know. Anyway, so you can form your inner voice, and then that, in a sense, adds to your hopefulness for the future, like being more hopeful and positive for the future, and that will give your imagination permission to play, to permission to reach out and be like, well, this is a possibility and that would be good, and this is a possibility and that would be good too, and just like, and you can, and it's, the phrase like reach for your dreams or whatever, but you can let yourself have tons of dreams, you know and you don't have to not all of them have to become reality, but some of them might. And then you choose the ones that you actually want to work for. Like, I have all these different dreams. Like, it'd be fun to live on a beach in Italy, and it'd be fun to live full time in an RV, or, just all these different things. There's like prioritizing which dreams do I actually want to make into goals, um, and adjust accordingly, because we change, our lives change, and be flexible. But
I think that you touch on something that's really inspiring, and I think it's something that could help people. Is you and Nat both moved? You're in Atlanta, Georgia now, right? You guys
yeah.
both moved there, and obviously you saw something better, right? I've heard of this phrase before, where you let go of the good to get something better. And I think it's really interesting how, I had that recently with something my wife and I talked about, and I was like, oh, well, actually, this is a possibility, and my mind completely changed on what was possible for the future. But it's so hard. I feel like we live in this world where it's so easy to have these if you want to call it a fixed mindset, or these self-limiting beliefs where we're like, well, I have to stay in the same town, right? Or I have to do this, or I have to do that. And that actually happened with my last job search. I was like, when I found the job that I currently have, I was like, I want to commute in this small area, right? I hate commuting. So I was like, okay, I've got a 13-mile radius. It's a half-hour drive. And once I opened up my horizons, I was able to get a job. So I think you touched on something that's really important there, and I didn't never thought of it as being creative, but that's I really enjoyed that. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And then, oh,
go
sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm just thinking about just the moving. Right. So, like, for example, it's a big pain to move, especially with a family, right? But we moved because we could envision a better life for our family. And part of it was looking around us. You look around you and you see the kind of people that you're with and what their lives are like. And it's kind of a premonition of what your life is going to be like if you stay there, or if you stay on the track you're on. And I had this moment where I looked around, like, you know what? I don't really want this. So what else can we do? And it was a huge, I mean, it almost destroyed us. Like, that was hard times. But now that we're kind of coming out of that, we've fought through it. We're getting there. But
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's good to know too. Is like, just because things are hard doesn't mean they're not worth it when you have this creativity. And so, is there a favorite tool that you like to use? I know we talked a little bit about this before, like productivity tool or development tool, anything like that.
in terms of tools, I'm still pretty old fashioned. I use a notebook. I don't know. Yeah, I was thinking about saying imagination is my tool. I use.
Well, that's basically your brain, right?
Yep. It's like, but in terms of development tools or external tools, I just love how you can use multiple screens on a MacBook. It's amazing. That's one of the little things I learned at a meetup from some random person. Just like, this is amazing. I can do tons of stuff at the same time.
Right.
But yeah. But in terms of, like, how I said, setting my goals and subdividing them, I'm still old fashioned. I have a wall calendar that I like write things on, so I don't have to open up my calendar on my computer. I have a little notebook, because it's actually so satisfying to write things on a list and cross them out one by one. And then when it's all done, you rip the piece of paper out and throw it in the trash. Just like, yes. But yeah, I don't know.
No, I think that's great, because I think it's important to realize, like, you got to use the tools that work for you, right? Whatever works for you. So that's cool. I need to use more paper stuff, because I'm bad at planning on digital. I'm still trying to get used to. I've been doing it for a long time, but so Do you have a favorite productivity technique or paradigm that we haven't talked about so far? I know we've talked about, you've given us a lot of great ideas. If there's not one on the top of your head, that's fine too, because I know you've shared a
So
lot of them.
what's an example? What would be a good example? Like what kind of thing do you do? So I can.
Um, so productivity technique is, you put me on the spot here. So, um, I think I think you talked about one, like divide and conquer, right? So dividing and conquer your goals. I don't use it as much as I should, but saying, I need to break this thing down. If you have something you can't solve, you need to break down the problem into something you can solve, and then build on top of it. That might be one type of technique. Um, uh, Trying to think of some other ones.
That was a great example, and it brought to mind something. It was several years ago. I read a book that helped. I mean, Nat and I both read this book, and it helped us a lot. It's by Scott Adams, and it's called "How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big."
That's a great book. I highly recommend it too.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yep. And he has a lot of great tips. I mean, and of course, he puts his little clever humor stuff in there. So I like reading books like that. But one thing he pointed out was doing things that give you energy. Like there are some things that drain your energy and things that actually give you more energy. Um, so I mentioned, like, when I go to a meetup, I come home and I'm super energized. I'm just ready to take on the world and do more and stay up all night coding, or you know. uh, However, some people but I'm extroverted, so maybe for introverts it'd be the opposite. Like they'd actually come home totally drained and need to recharge. Um, and one of the so this goes so that idea goes along with following your interests. This is another idea I learned about when I was reading about different schooling philosophies. Like I've been homeschooling the kids, so but when they were getting kind of older, I'm like, well, I better start thinking about this more. I read all these books about different homeschool or schooling educational philosophies. And one of the ones that I kept coming across was the idea of following your interests, and that people are very good, just instinctually, at knowing what they need to learn to survive, you know? And we learn it by watching other people like older people who have obviously survived longer than we have for what you know?
Yeah.
So like kids watch their parents and they want to do what their parents are doing. You can tell them to do something different, but it's not going to work because this is just how we learn. We watch other people and we learn from what they're doing. And 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 it's the same with yourself. Like if you try to force yourself to learn something because someone says you should, it's going to be a battle the whole way. It's just like, and how much you're going to retain, and either uh like in school, whenever I was supposed to learn something for a test or a paper or something, I was pretty good academically, so I knew how to learn enough to pass the test, write the paper, whatever. But now, several years later, I don't remember. But the things I really remember years and years later are the things that I was actually interested in learning. And those are the things. Um, and once again, there's mental tricks. Like you can actually trick yourself into being interested in something too. And so instead of trying to force yourself to do something that you're not interested in, it's like tricking yourself somehow into being interested in it. Um, and one way to be interested, especially in terms of like web development, like I've tricked myself into being super interested in learning something by building projects. If I actually it's that imagination thing. I imagine this thing I want to build, and these are the things I need to learn to build it. So as I'm learning those things, I'm like, oh yeah, I can incorporate this into that. Or I learned some React router. I'm like, oh, I could use this for so many projects, and gets my imagination going. And I'm like, I gotta do another project so I can use this. Um, what are we talking about again? What was your question?
I was talking about techniques, technique or paradigm, but I think that was a good.
Talking about oh yeah, the following your interests and the doing things that give you energy, and yeah, just yeah, being able to have fun with something, like learning through play was another thing. Kids, we're no different than kids, except we have more experience, we can manage our emotions better, most of us. We can communicate better, most of us, but when we look at kids, we're basically seeing just a younger version of ourselves, and just being in touch with that's still who I am, but I've just learned more and practiced more things, but learning through play is something that kids do. And so if you can get in that playful state of mind somehow, you can learn a lot. Which, might be one reason why I've been so obsessed with web development, is because it feels like playing to me. It just, yeah, more and more. It's like kids building with Legos or something. So anyway, yeah, play. That's my tool. That's my favorite tool, is play.
That's awesome. No, that's really good. I thought of something too as well, as at least with when I was going through school, is because one of the things you touched on was like we're just the same as our, I have a daughter, we're just the same as our tiny humans, right?
Yeah.
We have you need there's three things that you need for every work environment. I can't remember them right off the top of my head, but one of them is basically autonomy or control, right? We need the semblance of control to be able to feel like, take control away from a 2-year-old, right? I have a daughter who's 2 years old. It's not fun, right? So the control, when you reappraise, I've actually learned this technique from a book called Your Brain at Work. But when you reappraise a situation or change it and say, I'm going to have, instead of like when you run into a configuration problem or when you run into something you don't understand, you give yourself permission to take a certain amount of time to work on that thing, you are now changing your mindset about it. And now you're saying it's fine if this takes an hour or two. And I've noticed changing that as well has helped me a lot. So you just reminded me about that. So thanks for indulging me and sharing it.
Yeah.
So what time of day are you most productive?
Time of day. I'm a morning person. I kind of, the morning I can do it, but I can also do like afternoon and even at night when the kids are in bed. I think the biggest key is not necessarily the time of day, but having uninterrupted hours. Actually, like 3 hours is like my magic number. And if I try to go more than 3 hours, my brain just rebels and is like, nope, we're done. Well, and also I need to eat something. I need to go to the bathroom. Like everything about me just says, nope, that's enough.
Right.
But if and the entire world just can shut out. So just having those hours to focus for real focused work. And that's one reason why I like the idea of working remotely, or the option of working remotely, is because I love the idea of going into the office to interact and ask questions and go to meetings and have those vision meetings or setting goals, that kind of stuff. But in terms of actually focused work, I want to go shut myself up somewhere because any interruption is going to break that focus and just frustrate me. So even though I try to code during the day while I'm watching the kids, I decide, nope, I better just wait. I'm just getting frustrated. I can do other things like read emails, read some articles, answer messages, or different things like that take like short focus periods. But I'm not gonna solve this bug, or I'm not gonna, I really need to focus on this. So I'm gonna save it for the evening or Saturday morning. Nat gives me time on Saturday morning to just go off. And so it's more the having the length of time versus the time of day for me. Yeah.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. So as we wrap up here, what's the best advice you've ever received on how to be productive as a developer, or just productive in general?
The best advice. Um, I mean, that advice, follow your interests. I mean, that just keeps coming up is follow your interests. We try to su- suppress what we're interested in sometimes because it's not what we're supposed to be doing. But I think that's one of the great things that's changing in the workplace, actually, is giving developers more freedom to solve things or to work, like the unlimited PTO and the flexible hours and different things, just coming to more of an understanding of, okay, each person needs to decide how they're going to be most productive. And like, if you just aren't into it right now and you're interested in this other thing, or, it's going to be really hard to try to force yourself to do that. And it's better to just go for a walk or something and come back later. Just admit that I'm not really interested in this right now, or my brain is rebelling or whatever. Yeah. So follow your interests. And if, yeah, yep, that's basically the best advice I've got. Yep.
Awesome. So thanks so much, Martha. So what's the best way that if people want to follow you, is LinkedIn the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yes, I'm most active on LinkedIn. I also have a Twitter account that I haven't been super active on. But yeah, LinkedIn is where I'll see your messages or comments or whatever it is.
So it looks like it's linkedin.com/n/Martha Sharpe with an E 2020. We'll put a link in the description below as well. Anyway, it's been a real pleasure, Martha. I hope to run into you again and see what you do in the future. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tyler.